Alright, I upgraded from the EOS RP to the R5C. I will talk about my decision factors and tell you my positive and negative discoveries. You will see example footage along the way, and I will finally decide if it was worth the upgrade or not. Okay, in my last video, I showed you how I rigged up my Canon EOS RP to compensate some of its limitations when it comes to filmmaking. I liked the setup for the most part, but I was still looking for improvements. So, what options exist right now if you want a new camera for filmmaking? Since I have the RP and some RF lenses, only an RF mount camera was an option for me. It might be worth a thought to get an older Canon cinema camera that is based on the EF mount, but for me that was not on the table. The remaining options are R5, R6, C70, R3 or R5C. I don't want to talk too much about the differences of those cameras, but this table here shows the factors that I took into my personal consideration. I looked into the R5, but the overheating issue scared me off. The problem can be solved with an external recorder, typically built into a monitor. The C70 would have been an option too, but although I know that Super 35 is popular in film, I still prefer full frame. All my lenses would appear more zoomed in when being used on that smaller sensor size, so I would lose my wide angle options. My 60mm lens would have the field of view of something like 24mm, and you also get more bokeh with full frame. My RF 24-104L is a universal lens that is not too big, but has an aperture of only 4, and using that with Super 35 would result in even smaller bokeh. An argument for the C70 is that you can use the speed booster, which is an EF to RF converter that also shrinks the image to the smaller sensor. So you keep the field of view of full frame, but this obviously only works with EF lenses. If you're using cinema lenses with EF mount anyway, this might be a good option indeed. On the other hand, if you mostly want to use EF lenses anyway, you can get an RF to EF adapter with slide-in ND filter. Then you are quite close to having built-in ND filters, I would say. So none of the cameras check all the boxes. Another option would be to wait longer until Canon releases something else, but looking at the current chip shortage and also looking at the prices of the cameras, I doubt they soon will release anything that would fit my needs better and still be in an acceptable price range. The perfect camera for me probably would have been the R5C, but without the photo part, so that it would be a bit cheaper, or have IBIS instead. Anyway, I decided to go with R5C, and overall I have to say that I like it a lot so far, but I want to put it to the test and actually compare it to the RP. Was it worth the upgrade? First, built-in exposure tools, focus peaking and grid lines. I already had those features before by using an external monitor, but I have to say that it's just awesome to have them built in. I will definitely continue using an external monitor for professional work, but there are cases where a reduced rig is a big plus. And leaving out the monitor is a size reduction by 50%. The camera itself allows me to practice those tools even when I'm just filming friends and family, so I think Pro tools are great to have even when shooting non-pro stuff. And even when I used the R5C with an external monitor, the internal exposure tools and focus peaking are not triggered by the wide UI elements. When using the exposure tools in the monitor, they analyze the complete HDMI signal from the camera, which includes the menus. So you see the white text and icons being reported as overexposed. It's not a big deal, but you have to know it and it looks weird. Second, battery life. Well, it did not get better at all. You barely get an hour of shooting time with the R5C, and some recording modes don't even work with internal battery at all, but require a power connection. But for longer shoots, I would probably use my V-mount battery anyway, because I would also use the external screen in those circumstances. So this is actually not such a big deal for me. I still hope though that the battery life will improve with a future firmware update. I will get a second battery at some point, because I like to have one as a backup. The poor battery life is a big topic right now when it comes to the R5C, and I wonder why all those people with early access to that camera did not complain louder. Has that not been an issue with pre-release firmwares, or was Canon promising that they would fix it before launch? I don't know. Third, resolution. Well, the R5C does even 8K, so there's a big jump from the RP. We can look at some examples. looking at the RP's footage first and then going to the R5C, you see a lot more details and nicer colors. I'm also giving you the waveforms from DaVinci Resolve. I took each pair of footage with the same settings on both cameras, using the same lens. In some cases, it looks like that the RP makes a brighter image, leading to some clipping in the highlights. Stepping down would probably improve the image, unless it causes clipping in the shadows. Fourth, the dynamic range is better, probably a lot better. The R5C has around 12 stops, while the RP is at, I think, 10 stops. I don't want to talk too much about those numbers. I'd rather compare the footage to get a feeling for it. Here I have an extreme situation with a bright window. If I set the exposure for the outside, I get a lot of clipping in the shadows in both cameras. Bumping up the gamma in DaVinci Resolve unveils that the R5C preserves a lot more details and there's a lot less noise. We see a lot of banding in the waveforms in the RP's image, which has only 8-bit colors, while the R5C's has 10 bits. Obviously, you would not film this room like that, but reduce the dynamic range of the scene, for example, by adding lights, or you would just expose for the inside of the room. Comparing the footage shows that the R5C then preserves more details from the outside than the RP does. Here's another example that I shot in the car to mimic a vlogging scenario. I adjusted the exposure of the face, and if we look at the highlights outside of the window, we can see a lot more details in the R5C's image. To get most dynamic range out of the R5C, you have to record in RAW or log. I, however, did these tests just in BT709 wide DR, which only requires no or only minimal color adjustment in post. This color profile is a huge benefit of the R5C in my opinion if you don't want to record in RAW or log all the time, but still have wide dynamic range. Stabilization. Well, the big disappointment of the R5C is that it does not have IBIS like the R5. I still think it should have been in there, but I can actually live without it. I had a chance to test the IBIS for video on the R6 some time ago, and during my first tests I was indeed fascinated by it. I think if you want to mimic a static shot, it can work, but I don't like those jumps that the IBIS makes when you move the camera a lot. IBIS tries to compensate the camera movement completely until you move too far, and at this point it jumps. Look at the footage here. It's definitely usable, but for very good results I would still use a tripod or a gimbal. I'm not saying that IBIS in general is not suitable for video cameras. I just think that Canon's implementation of it, that I know from the R5 and R6, is not that great, so that I would miss it a lot in the R5C. Canon originally said that IBIS is great for video when they introduced the R5 and R6. Now they say that it's actually better for a cinema camera not to have IBIS. Without being part of the engineering team at Canon, obviously, I think that IBIS has to work a bit differently for video than it does for photo. I think instead of trying to completely eliminate any movement in the camera image, it should just reduce it or smooth it so that there would be no jumps in case of bigger movements. I can definitely imagine that Canon will come out at some point with an IBIS system that they will say is great to have in a cinema camera, but they are just not there yet. There has been a big discussion about the missing IBIS in the R5C in the media, and these were my 2 cents about it. For steadier handheld shots, I have indeed started to use digital IS sometimes. I had been avoiding it before because I feared it would reduce image quality too much because the camera has to zoom in. But since the sensor has such a high resolution, the zoomed in image is still of a high quality. The only 2 remaining downsides then are that the image gets cropped in or zoomed in, and an originally shaky image that has been stabilized afterwards still has motion blur in it. Warp stabilization in post has the same problem though, and people use it all the time. So when it has to be very good, use a gimbal or tripod. Oh, and there still is lens stabilization, of course. And the specification of the R5C says that digital IS has been improved to work better in combination with stabilized lenses. The C70 also has that improvement, the RP does not. So I tried to find out how much difference there is between the RP and the R5C when using digital IS and lens IS. So here are two clips. I have to say, I think it's hard to notice the difference in these examples, but I feel good that Canon did something here. One last thing about digital IS, I also have a cinema lens, which is totally manual. It has no digital contacts at all, and this means that the camera does not know the focal length of the lens when you attach it. And that seems to be crucial information for digital IS, and this causes the RP to completely deactivate it, indicated by a flashing icon. The R5C, on the other hand, has a menu option for manually dialing in the focal length, and digital IS works after that. Finally, sixth, the R5C has 4-channel audio but only one stereo microphone connector. However, it is possible to connect 2 more channels using the new accessory shoe. That would only be an option for me if there was some kind of shoe relocation solution, because I typically have a top handle at that spot and I mount the microphone on the side of the camera. It would be great if the camera supported USB-C microphones. Then I could plug in my Rode VideoMic NTG that way. At least the camera can record the internal microphone in addition to the external microphone. You need to be recording in XF-AVC though. So these were the topics where I was looking for improvements, and the R5C actually satisfies me. Now there are some things that I was surprised about because I was not expecting them. Number 1, slow motion. You can make slow motion recordings with the RP just by specifying a higher frame rate and then later changing the frame rate in post. The R5C actually has a dedicated function for this, which has the advantage that you can already replay the footage in slow motion on the camera. This is great because you can immediately see how the shot turned out. And although I haven't recorded slow motion too often in the past, it actually is an awesome hack to create smooth camera movements. I did this one handheld at 120 frames per second. Number 2, shutter angle. Normally, you have to manually set the shutter speed to twice the frame rate, in most cases 1/50th of a second if you record 24 frames per second. If you record slow motion, you have to change not only the frame rate, but also the shutter speed to keep that relationship. The R5C, however, lets you set the shutter angle to 180, and you don't have to do that computation anymore. Number 3, XF-AVC. I did not know very much about different codecs and containers before because there were no such options on the RP, but the R5 now offers XF-AVC, and this seems to be a lot better to work with than MP4. On my computer, using footage in DaVinci Resolve is notably faster now, especially when dealing with 4K instead of Full HD. Number 4, the internal screen stays on when I plug in the external monitor. So you can continue using the menus with a touch screen. And you can even control the visibility of things independently. For example, you can hide the menus on the HDMI or show false colors only on the internal screen. It really bothered me on the RP that the internal screen is turned off when HDMI is connected, and this also removes all the touchscreen functionalities like moving the focus zone. Number 5, fine iris adjustment. Cinema lenses typically have a focus ring and an iris ring. And that iris ring is continuous, it has no fixed stops. And that allows you to make very fine adjustments and even make smooth transitions. And I wondered why this is not possible with regular lenses. It turns out it is possible. The R5C has the option for fine iris adjustment, and when you activate it, you can make very fine iris adjustments. I just wish that the control ring of the RF lenses had a finer resolution, or that the sensitivity could be increased, so that this feature could be controlled better. Right now, you have to turn it very long ways to make significant changes to the iris. Number 6, crop modes. The RP has it for photo, but not for video. So if you want to use a non-full frame lens on the R5C, or if you just want to see what angle of view the lens would have on a Super 35 sensor, you can easily do that now on the R5C. Now, there are also some negative surprises. Most of them make me feel like the R5C is an unfinished product, and I hope that things will change with firmware updates. Number 1, the Wi-Fi module does not work in video mode. In order to use any Wi-Fi features like the Canon Control app or the browser remote feature, which I was really excited about, you have to get the Canon wireless file transmitter, which is very expensive. Number 2, you need a card reader to get XF-AVC footage from the camera. You can connect the camera to the computer and use the EOS utility to download images and videos, but not the ones that were recorded in that format. They just don't show up in the software. Number 3, XF-AVC is great, but you cannot record in 8K with it. 8K only works with RAW and MP4. Using those files is probably very slow. I have not tried it yet actually. Number 4, switching between photo and video is relatively slow, which already has been discussed a lot, but I actually rarely do that. Most of the time when I do it, it is because I accidentally turned it on into the wrong mode. But turning the camera on into one of the modes is actually very fast. I've heard that other cameras have a boot up time of several seconds, not so here. The camera is on almost immediately. Number 5, in general, I would say that implementing the dual operating system was a great idea by Canon, but some things about it feel a bit weird, especially when it comes to organizational things like getting photos or videos from the camera using USB-C. In that case, you have to go to photo mode. If you want to update the firmware, you have to do that in video mode. So you have to know where to go to have certain things, but overall, this is still better in my opinion than having only one of the OSs. Number 6, I was excited about Focus Guide. I thought this would be a great thing when using manual lenses like my cinema lens. That feature shows a little box like the autofocus zone, but instead of focusing automatically, it just shows you how you have to change the focus to get that part of the image into focus. That way you have the benefits of manual focusing together with a digital assistant. The C70 allows you to set 2 focus guide windows, which is nice for focus transitions. The R5C only allows you to have 1. However, it seems a bit laggy to me anyway, and it only works if you are already relatively close to the correct focus point. Otherwise, it just shows the focus position as unknown. And Focus Guide only works with lenses that have an electronic connection to the camera. My manual cinema lens does not work with it, so that was actually a disappointment. I wish there was a way to manually enter the necessary data of the lens, like it is for stabilization as I showed earlier. Number 7, no Canon camera API. The CCAPI allows you to control the camera using HTTP requests and is supported by the RP, R6, R5, R3, some PowerShot cameras and so on. So I assumed it would be available on the R5C as well. However, this is not the case. No CCAPI even in photo mode. The R5C has browser remote, which is also based on HTTP, so that might be a workaround. That even has some features that the CCAPI does not have, but I was not able to test browser remote because I don't have that required wireless file transmitter. So remote control features are really bad right now on the R5C. Please fix that, Canon. Number 8, I already had a dummy battery for using the R6 with my V-mount battery, but that adapter does not work with the R5C in video mode. It would shut off with a low voltage warning. You have to get a different one that provides 9 volts to the camera. I don't regret upgrading to the R5C from the RP at all. There's so much more to discover. I like that I don't have to rely on external monitor for exposure tools or grid lines. It feels like some things need to be improved by Canon, but looking at the last updates that the R5 and the C70 have received, it gives me hope that Canon is going to improve the R5C as well. I would also say that I don't regret my previous purchases for the most part. The bigger screen that I got for the IP still makes sense with the R5C in certain situations. Same is true for the external battery, top handles, matte box. So if you're not sure if you should upgrade to a new camera right now, my advice would be to mainly invest in things that will also make sense later when you do get a new camera. Otherwise, you buy more and more stuff that you might regret later. For example, I actually regret getting the Ronin SC. Even with the RP, it turned out to be too small for my 24-104 zoom lens or a shotgun mic. So I sold it again and got the RS-II, which is now also strong enough to carry the R5C. Obviously, it's more expensive, but buy once, cry once. One last thing, if you are using DaVinci Resolve in the free version, that one does not support 10-bit colors, so plan on spending another $300 for the studio version. If you want to see more footage that I recorded with the camera, wait until the end of the video. Now, I absolutely agree with the idea that filmmaking skills are far more important than gear. Gear does make a difference though. If you are using a lower budget camera and you're wondering if you should upgrade to a better one, I hope this video gave you some helpful information, especially if you're interested in the R5C. Let me know in the comments how you are doing with the RP or the R5C, or how you like this video. This is a completely new channel, so I appreciate your feedback. See you next time. Okay, it's really hard to get the R5C right now, and I decided quite late to buy it. I think it was the middle of March, so I would probably still be waiting for it for quite a while. However, as I said earlier, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm working on a piece of accessory for Canon cameras. I've been in contact with Canon about this, and Frank Winklmeier from Canon ProIG helped me to get my hands on this camera early so that I could do some tests with it. If you want to learn more about that accessory that I'm building, then you should subscribe to this channel, because one of the next videos will be about that thing. I think you will not be disappointed, so see you next time.